Let's try to understand this passage. Two works published in 1984 demonstrate, so these two works demonstrate something, contrasting approaches. Okay, so these two works present contrasting approaches to writing the history of US women. Okay, so there are two ways to write history of US women, and these two works demonstrate those two approaches. Okay, B and B's biography of Mary Fish. So this lady lived from this to this. So this biography makes little effort. So little has a negative connotation. That means almost zero effort or less than expected. Makes little effort to place her story, so to place Mary Fish's story in the context of recent historiography on women. Historiography essentially means study of the historical writing. So recent historiography means, let's say we have now studied historical writings of women and we have a particular image how women were at that time. Okay, and so this is saying this biography, so they have written a biography of Mary Fish, but they have made little effort to place her story in the context of how we perceive women were at that time. Okay, so we have built some perception on the basis of studying historical writings of women of that time. So now, but this biography has not made any effort or has made very less effort to place her story in the context of what we know about women of that period. This person, Lepsock, meanwhile attempts not only to write the history of women, okay, so this person is writing the history of women in one southern community, but also redirect 2 decades of historiographical debate. Okay, so now this person is doing something different. So these two guys were essentially just writing the story. They were not really making an effort to really see how that story sort of aligns with what we know about women of that era. But this person is actually writing the history, but is also redirecting or influencing the historiographical debate as to whether women gained or lost status in the 19th century as compared with the 18th century. So there is a debate going on in terms of whether women gained status or lost status in the 19th century. So this person, Lepsock, is not just writing the history, is also sort of influencing that historiographical debate around whether women gained or lost status. Okay. So although both books offer the reader the opportunity to assess this controversy regarding women's status, okay, so both books offer the reader the opportunity to assess this controversy. Controversy is essentially the debate whether women gained or lost status. So both books are offering the reader the opportunity to evaluate this controversy. So both books are offering us the raw material to evaluate this debate, this controversy. Only Lepsock's book deals with it directly, but we already know, right? B and B's biography is not dealing with the controversies directly. They are just writing her story. They are not really trying to really place her story in the context of right overall how women were at that in that era. Whereas Lapsang is making that effort. Uh, really, she's putting that story in the context of what we know about women of that era. So Slapsog is dealing with that controversy directly. So she examines, so she is referring to Lepsok. She examines several different aspects of women's status, helping to refine and resolve the issue. So she is examining several different aspects, and that's how she's helping to refine and resolve the issues. Issues mean essentially the debate going on, right? So she is trying to at times refine and at times resolve the issues. Okay, that let's all agree that this is where women actually gain status or this is where women actually lost status. Okay, she concludes that So again, Lepsock concludes that while women gain autonomy in some areas, especially in the private sphere, so in this area, in some areas, women actually gained autonomy. So they gained some status. They lost it in many aspects of the economic sphere. So in some area, especially in the private sphere, they gained autonomy. But in many other aspects, they actually lost status, especially in the many aspects of the economic sphere. So it's not black and white that yeah, they gained status or they lost status. So she's defining that. She's saying, okay, let's first segregate the area that we want to talk about. Then in particular areas, women have gained status, and in particular areas, women have actually lost status. More importantly, she knows that the debate itself depends on frame of reference. So this is what we were talking about, right? So debate itself depends on frame of reference. So if you look at the private sphere, women have actually improved. If you look at the economic sphere, women have actually gone down or deteriorated. In many respects, women lost power in relation to men. For example, as certain jobs, so delivering babies is one of the jobs, right? So probably male doctors took over this job. Supervising schools, probably these things were mainly done by females or were done by females to a good extent, but then gradually were taken over by men. So these things were taken over by men. Okay, so in this frame of reference, actually, women lost power in relation to men. Okay, yet women also gained power in comparison with their previous status. So they gained power in comparison with their previous status. Okay, so if you look at their comparison with their previous status, they have actually gained power in some cases. Okay, owning a higher proportion of real estate, for example. Okay, so this is how they gain power. So probably they had 20% of real estate before, and now they have 30% of real estate. So they are owning a higher proportion, so right? So that signifies that they have more power now. Okay, in contrast, BNB's biography provides ample raw material for questioning the myth. Okay, so they are providing ample raw material, right? So as we discussed, so they are providing us the material, they are giving us the story of that woman, but they're not really putting that story into the overall context. So we can use that story to really figure out whether women's status improved or went down. So they are providing ample raw material for questioning the myth. Okay, so they are providing ample material for questioning the myth fostered by some historians. So we are talking about a myth fostered by some historians of a colonial age, colonial golden age. So there is a myth of colonial golden age in the 18th century. So there is a myth that it was a very golden age, means it was a really good period for women, probably, right? In the context, it looks like it was a good period in which women were really doing well in the 18th century. So that's a myth, according to the author. And B&B's biography is providing us material for questioning that myth that women were really doing well in the 18th century, but does not give the reader. So this biography does not give the reader much guidance in analyzing the controversy. So, right, as we discussed, it's not giving us much guidance. This is just giving us raw material. This is just giving us one story, but they are not really putting that story into the overall context. So that makes sense. They are not giving the reader much guidance. Okay, so this is all. Let's now look at the questions. Okay, let's look at the first one. The primary purpose for the passage, overall, right? We are talking about two biographies, B&B's biography and Lesbach's book, and we are contrasting them overall, right? That B&B's biography did not sort of focus on the overall context, whereas it's Lepsock, essentially concerned about overall aspect also. So that seems to be the overall passage. Okay. Examine two sides of a historiographical debate. Two sides, examine two sides. No, no, no. We are saying that there were two sides, whether women gained status or lost status, but we are not really overall examining two sides of the debate. We're just talking about two different works that one actually delved into the historiographical debate, whereas one just presented the story of a woman of that period. Okay, so this is not the case. Call into question an author's approach to historiography. We're not calling into question anybody's approach. You're just presenting that, yeah, this person has that approach, this person has that approach. Examine one author's approach to a historiographical debate. No, no, we are talking about two authors, not just one author. Discuss two authors' work in relationship to a historiographical debate. Yeah, correct. So one is talking about historiographical debate, one is just presenting a story without getting into historiographical debate. So that's fine. Explain the prevalent perspective on this debate. We're not talking about a prevalent perspective. Okay, what is the view or what is the prevalent view today that whether women gain status or lost status? That's not even discussed here. So this is out. So D is the answer. Let's look at the next question now. Okay, the author of the passage mentions the supervision of schools primarily in order to. So it talks about supervising schools here. Essentially, the author was talking about supervising schools essentially in terms of that in many respects, women lost power, right? Because certain jobs were taken over by men. So this is one respect in which women lost power. So this is just giving an example that this kind of job was taken over by men. Remind readers of the role education played. No, no, no. Definitely not. We are not talking about the role education played. Suggest an area in which 19th century American women were relatively free to exercise power. No, no, no. This is not where they were relatively free. Essentially, this is where they lost power. Provide an example of an occupation for which accurate data are difficult to obtain. No, no. We're not talking about that. It's difficult to obtain data about this. Speculate about which occupations were considered suitable for US women of the 19th century. No, no, we are not speculating about which occupations were considered suitable. We were just saying that, yeah, these jobs were taken over by men. We're not saying this is suitable actually. Illustrate how the answers to questions about women's status depend on particular context, right? So in this context, it lost power. In some other contexts, it actually gained power. For example, owning a higher proportion of real estate. So it depends on the context, right? The answer depends on the context. So yeah, E is the answer. Let's move on to the next one. Okay. With which of the following characterizations of Lepsoc's contribution to the controversy? Okay, with which of the following characterization of this person's contribution to the controversy, and the controversy is regarding women's status in the 19th century US. So with which of the following characterizations of this person's contribution would the author agree? Okay. Essentially, if we were to characterize this person's contribution, which characterization of this person's contribution to the controversy? So she's refining and resolving, right? That's what the author said. So this is her contribution, and this characterization the author should agree. Okay. Lepsock has studied women from a formerly neglected region. And no, this is never given in the passage. Lepsock has demonstrated the importance of frame of reference in answering questions. That's absolutely right. She's refining the issue. So she's saying, okay, it depends on the frame of reference. Lepsock has addressed the controversy by using women's current status as a frame of reference. No, she's not taking the woman's current status as a frame of reference. Lepsock has analyzed statistics about occupations and property. No, this is not given. Lepsock has applied recent historiographical methods. This is also not given that she has applied these. Okay, So B is the answer. Okay, fourth one. According to the passage, Lepsok's work differs from B&B's work in that Lepsok's work, so she is focused on the overall context, right? Uh, she's trying to present her book in the overall context of the debate, and she's not just presenting the story as B&B are doing. Okay, so Lepsok's work uses a large number of primary sources. No, that's wrong. Ignores issues of, no, that's not given. Refuses to take a position. It's not. She's refusing to take a position, and that's how she's different. Addresses larger. Yes, she is addressing larger historiographical issues which are completely ignored by BNB. Fails to provide sufficient material to support its claims. Not given. Okay, let's scroll down. The passage suggests that Lepsok believes that compared to 19th century American women, 18th century American women were. Okay, so we are talking about Lepsok's belief. Okay, according to the passage, but Lepsok believes. And here we are talking about compared to 19th century women, 18th century women were. Okay, so this is interesting. So here we were talking about 18th century women with respect to 19th century. The whole passage was talking about 19th century women while comparing them with 18th century. And now here we have to talk about 18th century American women with a background of 19th century. Okay, so that's something that we need to take care of. 18th century women were in many respects less powerful. It talks about in many respects women lost power in relation to men, but this is given with respect to 19th century. So 19th century women actually lost power in relation to men. So 18th century were actually more powerful, not less powerful in relation to men, given the passage. So that's wrong. More likely to own real estate. So this is again 19th century, that they owned a higher proportion of real estate. So this is again in the opposite direction. Not 18th century women were not more likely, they were actually less likely. Generally more economically independent. Yes, this is right, because we are given that the women of the 19th century actually lost autonomy in many respects of the economic spheres, right? So it means actually 18th century women were more economically independent. So this is right. 18th century women were more independent in conducting their private lives. That's wrong. 19th century women were actually more independent because they gained autonomy, especially in the private sphere. Less likely to work as school superintendents? No, that's wrong. 18th century women were actually more likely to work as school superintendents, because by 19th century, these jobs were taken over by men. Okay, so C is the answer. Let's scroll down. Okay, so we are on the last. Yes, so this is the last question. Let me clear. The passage suggests that B&B's biography of Mary Fish provides evidence for which of the following views of women's history. So they provide evidence for which of the following views. I think it just talks about this here, that they provide ample raw material for questioning the myth of a colonial golden age. So it can provide evidence to question the myth of a colonial golden age, that it was not as good as we think. Okay. Women have lost power in relation to men since the colonial era. So it's giving us evidence that women have lost power since the colonial era. No, actually, it's questioning the myth. So it has to give us evidence in terms of that women have gained power, that it was not a golden era, right? If it gives us this evidence that women have lost power, then it means they were better off in the colonial era. So it was actually a golden age kind of thing, right? But it's actually going against that it was not a golden age. So this option is actually in the opposite direction. Women of the colonial era were not as likely to be concerned with their status as a woman in the so how much they were concerned with their status is not the discussion here. The colonial era was not as favorable for women as some historians have believed. This is right because this biography is questioning that myth of a colonial golden age. So it was not as good as we think. We think it's a golden age, but it's questioning that myth. Yes. So C is the answer. Women had more economic autonomy in the colonial era than in the, again, this is in the opposite direction, right? It supports the colonial golden age rather than going against that. Women's occupation was generally more respected. Uh, no. We are not going into that. This occupations were generally more respected again is not given. And secondly, again, it's in the opposite direction. More respected in the colonial area. So it seems like they were better off. So it seems like it supports colonial golden age. So again, in the opposite direction, but in any case, we are not talking about how the occupations were respected. Okay, so this is it for this passage. Thank you so much. Let me know whether this video helped.